Hello, bruvs. We're back with the madness. Mary Lincoln and a espresso martini, and let's get on with this butter churning bullshit. Chapter 4 of Unsound Mind, and hopefully I read better than I did yesterday because I was awful. Let me turn this around. Chapter 4 of Unsound Mind. When Mary arrived in Chicago, she seemed startled that a perfectly healthy Robert met her at the station. He asked her to come stay at his house, but she declined since she and Robert's wife still were estranged. Instead, they went to the Grand Pacific Hotel to secure her a room and to have supper. After Mary told Robert that a man had poisoned her coffee on the train ride north, Robert decided to take a room for himself as well. He slept at the hotel in a room next to Mary's every night for more than 2 weeks. Mary slept well the first night, but most every night thereafter she was restless and would knock on Robert's door, often because she was afraid of being alone. Twice in one night she knocked on his door and eventually asked to sleep in his room. Robert gave her the bed and he slept on the lounge. After that, Robert called Dr. Ralph N. Isham, his personal physician, to attend his mother. Around April 1st, Mary became increasingly paranoid and agitated. That morning, she tried to go downstairs in the elevator half dressed. Robert called the elevator back and sought to induce Mary to return to her room, an interference she regarded as impertinent. When she refused to leave the elevator, Robert, with the help of a hotel employee, gently forced her out, to which she screamed, "You are going to murder me." Back in her room, Mary said that the wandering Jew who had taken her pocketbook, on the train in March would return it at 3 o'clock. She also sat near the wall and for an hour professed to be repeating what this man was telling her through the wall. During the afternoon, Mary approached the hotel manager, Samuel Turner, and said something was wrong with the house, that she heard strange sounds in her room and was afraid to be alone. She told him the city was on fire on the south side and then made him take her to every room with a 7 in its number in search of a Mr. Shoemaker. Turner took her back upstairs and said he would return in 15 minutes. 5 minutes later, she was back downstairs, repeating her fears and saying that a strange man in the corridor was going to molest her. She asked to stay in some other female boarder's room to be safe. Turner left her in the room of a Mrs. Dodge until she returned from dinner. But shortly thereafter he was summoned to the room where Mary's appearance was wild and her fears were repeated. Turner concluded she was deranged and did not consider it safe to leave her alone. That night, Mary knocked on Robert's hotel room door so many times that he told her he would leave the hotel if she persisted. Other hotel employees also witnessed Mary's bizarre behavior during the month of April, not the months. The hotel housekeeper, Mrs. Allen, who spent 2 nights in Mary's room, reported that Mary was excited, agitated, restless, and nervous, and that the widow said a small window in her room boded ill and disturbed her. Mrs. Allen also saw Mary mix several kinds of medicine together. Hotel employee Maggie Gavin, who took care of Mary's room and slept with the widow in her room for 4 weeks, witnessed similar events. She said Mary was anxious about her son and extremely restless at night, and often would pace the floor or go to Robert's room out of fear. Gavin said Mary would complain frequently that people were speaking to her through the wall or the floor and would call Gavin's attention to the voices. Mary also would point to nearby chimney smoke and say that the city was burning down. Robert also experienced his mother's fear of fire. about which the physicians later would warn him. He said that since the Great Fire of Chicago in 1871, his mother had kept her trunks and property in the Fidelity Safe Deposit Company's building. In late April, however, Mary became convinced that all of Chicago was going to be burned, except Robert's house, and declared that she intended to send her trunks to Milwaukee. Robert suggested that if his house were to be spared, then it would be the best storage place. Mary sent 11 trunks to Milwaukee at the end of April, however, although she told the United States Express Company agent she was going to summer in Wisconsin. The agent said he thought her manner was very strange. Other strange incidents at this time included one in which Mary, carelessly dressed and excited, asked second waiter John Fitzhenry to call the tallest man in the dining room to her, only to exclaim, "I am afraid, I am afraid." Cashier Charles Dodge corroborated this story and said Mary told him a stranger had been in her room and she was afraid he would molest her. Mary's materialist mania was a keystone of the trial and was, in fact, one of Robert's major pieces of evidence of her insanity. The fact that she wasted her money she perpetually complained of not having, on items that she never used nor wore. 5 Chicago merchants testified as to Mary's large and reckless purchases during the more than 10 weeks between her arrival in March and the day of the hearing in mid May. She bought $600 worth 40 pairs of lace curtains, 3 watches costing $450, $700 worth of jewelry, $200 worth of soaps and perfumes, and a whole piece of silk. Robert thought them all useless since he had no home to decorate and never wore anything but black clothing without jewelry. So he returned most of the items. Hotel employees, Mrs. Allen and Maggie Gavin, both saw Mary's closet bulging with unopened packages. Mary's mania for hoarding was also evidenced by Robert's discovery of numerous carpet bags filled with nothing but carpet-covered footstools. Dr. Willis Danforth, who had treated Mary in 1873 to 74, visited her around May 12th, at which time she repeated to him what she had told Robert, that she was poisoned on the train ride from Florida to Chicago. Danforth examined her and found no evidence of her ingesting any poison. Robert Lincoln may have been anxious about his mother's behavior, but having been concerned about her irrationalities since her father's assassination, he was not unprepared for it. The day of his mother's arrival in Chicago, Robert wrote to his cousin, Lizzie Grimsley Brown, who was one of only 2 family members with whom Mary still communicated. He informed her of the situation and sounded her out about about possibly coming to Chicago to stay with Mary. Robert wrote that he had anticipated trouble, although he was hopeful that it would blow over as his mother's past episodes had. "I will hold myself in readiness to answer your summons promptly," Brown replied. "I can imagine your fears and sympathize with you." Unfortunately, the trouble did not blow over, and Mary's condition deteriorated. By early May, Robert was so distressed in mind that I did not dare to trust to or act upon my own judgment, he later recalled. He called in Dr. Isham and Dr. Danforth to examine his mother and, presumably, to diagnose her. Right, bruv. He also consulted Dr. Richard J. Patterson, proprietor of Bellevue Place Sanitarium in Batavia, Illinois, and one of the region's leading mental health experts. On April 10th, he consulted U.S. Supreme Court Justice David Davis, who had been Abraham Lincoln's friend, colleague, presidential campaign manager, and executor of Lincoln's estate, and whom Robert considered a second father. He also consulted John Todd Stewart, who was mayor of Springfield, Illinois, Abraham Lincoln's first law partner and Mary Lincoln's cousin. Stewart was, along with Lizzie Brown, the other family member with whom Mary Lincoln still communicated. At the suggestion of Judge Davis, who's the best? Don't care. At the suggestion of Judge Davis, Robert consulted Chicago attorney Leonard Swett, one of the premier trial lawyers of the Midwest, and also a close friend, colleague, and confidant of Abraham Lincoln. He has more resources than most men. Indeed, I know no one who has more, Davis wrote to Robert. The addition of Swett into Robert's confidence had a major impact on later events concerning Mary Lincoln, but also in Robert's life. Davis, Stewart, and Swett each had known Mary Lincoln for more than 20 years and had spoken and visited with her both before and after the assassination. Mary Lincoln once wrote to a friend that she hoped Robert may be so fortunate as to become well acquainted with the friends whom his father loved so much. This hope came to fruition in early 1875, and Robert did nothing without consulting these advisers. As he later explained, whatever was done then was done not upon my own judgment alone, nor by myself done, but upon the most thorough consultation with an illegible consideration of the persons who I felt were nearest my father, to my mother, and to me, and to whom, under the distressing circumstances, I could and ought to trust for counsel and assistance. Robert Davis and Stewart then had a protracted consultation about Mary's condition and what should be done. All agreed that the widow was insane, had become a danger to herself, and needed personal restraint and medical care. Stewart not only expressed that he had no doubt that Mary was insane, but added that Count Lizzie Brown and all Mary's relatives in Springfield had the same opinion. Robert's concerns were multifaceted. Of course, he, Davis, and Stewart considered her sick and in need of medical treatment. Most importantly, however, they feared for Mary's personal safety. Her erratic actions and distracted mind made her susceptible to injury or death for any number of reasons at any time. Specifically, they knew she carried $57,000 in bonds and cash in her pockets, and they worried about her being injured or murdered by someone attempting to steal it. They also feared the loss of Mary's money and property to con men, or what was then called sharpers. Robert and Davis knew that Mary consulted frequently with spiritualists, whom they considered nothing but thieves preying on the gullible. For Mary's protection, Robert hired the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, whose sole duty was to have a man with his mother as a sort of guardian when she went out on the street. It has been suggested that the motivation of Robert Lincoln, David Davis, and Leonard Swett, for some reason historians have excluded John Todd Stewart, were injudicious at best, cruel, calculated, and ignominious at worst. That Robert sought his mother's commitment in order to steal her money and possessions, or at least to prevent her from giving away or selling her money and possessions, and thereby preserve his future inheritance, and that all three men were so embarrassed by her behavior that they wanted to get rid of her. One theory even accused Davis and Sweat of manipulating Robert into committing his mother in order to embarrass him sufficiently to destroy his political future and advance their own. Such views ignore not only the evidence and the clear concern expressed in all the correspondence, but also the socio-historical context of the time. And here is Robert T. Lincoln, circa 1875. Doesn't look like his father very much. Robert Lincoln was, as discussed in Chapter 2, a product of his generation, a thoroughly Victorian gentleman who deeply revered and felicitously followed the manly tenets of duty and honor. He's kind of got a Nietzschean mustache. Often, the obligations of duty required a man to act against his own will. For Robert, as head of the Lincoln family, it was his duty to care for and protect his mother. The constant refrain in his letters during the entire year of the insanity episode was that all his actions were part of his duty to his mother. As he wrote to his aunt, rightly or wrongly, I consider that I alone must assume the entire and absolute charge of her unfortunate situation, and I must deal with it as my condition allows me to do. I am alone held responsible, and I cannot help it. I have done my duty as best I know, and Providence must take care of the rest. Davis also encouraged Robert's submission to duty, as when he counseled in November 1875, "You cannot escape responsibility if you wanted to, and it would be esteemed by the world bad conduct if you should try. The trouble is on you, and would not let you alone, even to suppose an impossible case. You were willing, not killing, and should." This opinion of bad conduct by society was another weight on Robert's mind. It was his duty to care for his family, and to ignore his mother's vagaries would be to fail to do his duty, which would make him appear less than the manly idea in the eyes of the press. By 1875, masculinity had entered the social lexicon and begun to represent the way men sought to describe and explain their social roles. Between 1865 and 1890, according to one social historian, men approached all the issues that men face, physical, educational, domestic, and social issues, with a new sense of having to present themselves as manly, and a clear sense of how unmanly they would be considered if they did not measure up. One newspaper later opined on Robert's actions. There was reason to apprehend that in Mary Lincoln's restless, troubled state of mind she might have received personal injury, and at last, when longer delay would really be cruelty and neglect of duty, her son was compelled to the painful proceeding. This belief in manly duty was ubiquitous. Both David Davis and Leonard Swett believed it was their duty as friends of Abraham Lincoln to help Robert and Mary through their time of difficulty. Isaac Arnold, a friend of Abraham Lincoln's, and the man who defended Mary during her trial, also considered it his duty to Lincoln and to the law to act on Mary's behalf in court, even though he considered her insane. So it was with this mindset, then, that Robert sought advice from his father's and mother's most trusted friends, and then from 7 of the most distinguished physicians in Illinois. On Sunday, May 16th, at the office of B.F. Ayer, one of the most prominent members of the Chicago bar who would represent Robert at the insanity trial. A meeting was held to determine the state of Mary Lincoln's mental health. Present were Robert Swett, Ayer, and 6 physicians: Ralph N. Isham, Hosmer Allen Johnson, Charles Gilman Smith, Robert J. Patterson, Nathan Smith Davis, and James Stewart Jewell. Dr. Ralph N. Isham was Robert's personal physician. Born in Herkimer County, New York in 1831, he learned medicine through apprenticeship and interning. He moved to Chicago in 1855 and 4 years later helped found the Chicago Medical College, which later became the Medical School of Northwestern University. During the Civil War, he was the surgeon in charge of the main medical hospital in Chicago. After the war, he became the first surgeon of the Cook County Hospital and the Passavant Memorial Hospital. He also was the consulting surgeon on the staff of the Presbyterian Hospital. Isham accomplished these many responsibilities while conducting his own office practice. Dr. Hosmer, Allen Johnson, and Dr. Charles Gilman Smith had each helped treat Tad Lincoln during his final illness in 1871. Mary once characterized them as 2 excellent physicians. Johnson was a graduate of Chicago's Rush Medical College and later professor of medical jurisprudence. Smith first attended Harvard Medical School and then the University of Pennsylvania, from which he graduated. In 1853, he moved to Chicago, where he practiced family medicine, and during the Civil War, he was one of 6 physicians in charge of the prisoners at Camp Douglas, Illinois. In 1868, Smith went abroad to study medicine in the hospitals of France, Germany, and England. On his return to Chicago, he lectured at the Women's Medical College and was a consulting physician at the Women's and Children's Hospital and at the Presbyterian Hospital. Dr. Robert J. Patterson was one of the Midwest's leading mental health experts. He had been medical superintendent of both the Indiana and Iowa State Hospitals for the insane, as well as a professor of medical jurisprudence at Chicago Medical College. In 1875, he was proprietor and superintendent of Bellevue Place Sanitarium in Batavia, Illinois. Dr. Nathan Smith Davis is known as the father of the American Medical Association, which he founded in 1847 at age 30 and served as its president in 1864 to 65. He received his medical training at the Medical College of Western New York and was awarded his degree in January 1847, just a few days past his 20th birthday. In 1844, Davis was elected to serve in the New York Medical Society, where he worked to improve medical education and licensure. In 1849, he accepted a professorship in physiology and pathology at Rush Medical College in Chicago. He was the founder of the Chicago Medical College along with Ralph N. Isham, the Chicago Academy of Sciences, and the Washingtonian Home for the Lungs. Jesus Christ. Davis was and the Washingtonian Home for the Reformation of Inebriates. Davis was an expert on the nervous system, the lungs, and the connection between alcoholism and insanity. During his career, he published numerous papers in medical journals and served as editor of the Chicago Medical Examiner, the Northwestern Journal, and the Journal of the American Medical Association. Dr. James Stewart Jewell was one of the country's foremost experts on mental and nervous diseases. He studied at both Rush Medical College and the Chicago Medical College, graduating from the latter in 1860, where he was a professor of anatomy from 1864 to 1869, after which time he went abroad to study medicine in Europe. On his return to America in 1870, Jewell lectured on general pathology at Chicago Medical College. At the time of Mary Lincoln's insanity trial, Jewell was a professor and the chair of the Department of Nervous and Mental Diseases at Chicago Medical College, was regarded by his peers as an authority on these particular diseases and confined his practice exclusively to them. He also was a co-founder of the Quarterly Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases in 1874. Of the 6 physicians consulted, 3 had previously met or attended to Mary Lincoln. Isham on Mary's arrival in Chicago, Johnson and Smith during Tad's illness. Dr. Willis Danforth, Mary's previous physician, did not attend the meeting, but did testify at the trial in agreement with the conclusion of the other 6. Robert's advisors, David Davis and John Todd Stewart, did not attend the meeting of medical minds, but were informed of the discussions afterward. The discussions of that evening were not transcribed, but typical examinations of the insane during this period provided for physicians to begin by questioning the patient's last physician or physicians, in this case, Dr. Isham and Dr. Danforth. Dr. Johnson and Dr. Smith also would have offered any knowledge they had of Mary's health from their contacts with her during Tad's illness. Typical questions for the family during insanity consultations, what today are called mental status exams, in 1875 involved the patient's age, general habits and temperance, bodily health, any irregularity in menstruation or onset of menopause, family, history, I assume, history, the most recent delusions, the duration of delusions, and the most frequent topics of conversation. One typical tenet for diagnosis was to determine the degree to which the patient had departed from her normal condition, and not how widely she differed from other individuals or from a fixed standard. It is known that Mary's intense fear of fire was discussed, and the doctors told Robert that a person with such a delusion might suddenly jump out of a window. Believing the building to be in flames, they were pronounced and earnest that the time had come when her personal safety had to be assured. Robert later wrote, "The unanimous consensus and urgings of the physicians that Mary needed treatment should not be taken lightly. As one treatise on the subject stated, it was the physician's duty not to be bullied by the family into diagnosing insanity, but to diagnose only the patient's true condition. If insanity was the diagnosis, it was the physician's duty to inform the family of the need for commitment, even if the family did not want to believe it. It will be your duty to tell them that each day's postponement by so much lessens the probabilities of recovery, that insanity under timely and efficient treatment is commonly recovered from, then in 9 cases out of 10, the patient will not know where he is, appreciate his surroundings, or recognize the fact that his comrades are lunatics. At any rate, restraint and discipline applied in an asylum will be less irksome to him than if he is called to endure them in his own home. You must impress these points upon them firmly and forcibly, and make them fully understand the great responsibility that will rest upon them. If through their unwillingness to follow your advice the patient passes, for want of prompt and energetic treatment, into a condition of permanent mental stillness, alienation, not stillness. Well, I'm reading great again tonight. Robert later explained, at least tonight I have a reason. I had to go get my eyeballs numbed. Robert later explained separately to two people, his mother's closest friend, Sally Orne, and his own closest friend, John Hay, that the Council of Physicians told him every delay in his mother's treatment was making him morally responsible for some very probable tragedy which might occur at any moment. The next day after the meeting, Robert wrote letters at Sweat's suggestion to each physician asking their written opinion as to Mary's real condition, irrespective of the degree of evidence we might be able to obtain in regard to it. And also to Davis and to Stewart, inquiring as to a proper course of action, provided the physicians were willing in writing to pronounce her insane. That phrase, irrespective of the degree of evidence, makes it clear that Sweat wanted the doctor's honest opinion, not simply what would play well for a jury. Unfortunately for posterity, the 6 physicians offered no detailed diagnoses, but simply replied with identical one-page responses. Yes, Mary Lincoln was insane, and yes, she was a fit person to be confined into an asylum. Only Dr. Davis elaborated on his opinion with the statement that the character of her insanity is such that she may at times appear perfectly sane in ordinary conversations, and yet she is constantly subject to such mental hallucinations as to render her entirely unsafe if left to itself. This statement was consistent with the contemporary medical notion that some patients' delusions were understandable in normal conversation or everyday living until the subject of the delusion was broached. While Robert's advisors agreed that commitment was the only way to keep his mother safe, Mary's family was less certain. Both John Todd Stewart and Elizabeth Grimsley Brown were convinced of Mary's insanity and the need for a conservator to control her money and property, but hesitated at the prospect of personal restraint in an asylum. Stewart asked whether Mary would consent to remain in some private hospital if a conservator were appointed. David Davis did not think so. The appointment of a conservator without the confinement will not answer the purpose. It might do with persons of different temperament from Mrs. Lincoln, but with her it would not do at all. Like you, I have been satisfied for years that her unsoundness of mind affords the proper explanation for all the vagaries she has developed. Davis advised that if all the physicians affirmed in writing their opinions on Mary's condition, and if Sweat and Ayer, as attorneys, were satisfied they had enough evidence to make a case, then proceedings should begin immediately. He wrote to Sweat, and pardon me as I blow my nose. I am aware that an unfavorable verdict would be disastrous in the extreme, but this must be risked. If, after maturely considering the subject, your fixed opinion is that you ought to proceed, I do not see how Robert can get along at all unless he has the authority to subject his mother to treatment. You and I were devoted friends of her husband, and in this crisis, it is our duty to give to Robert the support which he so much needs, and I doubt not that he will receive the support from his relatives in Springfield. I know that he has the support of Mr. Stewart. I do not see the propriety of waiting until the commission of some act which would arrest public attention. It may be that medical attention in a retreat for insane persons would operate favorably upon her. This chance should not be lost. After all, the whole case turns on the sufficiency of the evidence to procure a favorable verdict. If you are satisfied on this point, believing as I do that Mrs. Lincoln is insane and should be placed under treatment, I see no other course than judicial action. Of course, this is painful to us all, and especially so to Robert. But like all other painful duties, it must be met and discharged. Thoughtful and right minded men will approve, and under the circumstances, it is hoped newspapers will forbear to criticize. Stewart also was wary of newspaper criticism and advised Robert to delay any proceedings against Mary until the facts and surrounding circumstances were fully sustained and justified by his friends and by the public. By May 17, Robert and Sweat had decided to wait until the physicians replied to Robert's queries about submitting their diagnoses in writing. But the next day, Mary's condition was worse. Not only was she spending vast amounts of money on useless items, but the Pinkerton agent reported that she was being visited in her room by suspicious people. Mary also had sold some of her bonds and had $1,000 in cash on her person and was considering leaving Chicago for either California or Europe. Sweat advised that they act immediately. The strain and difficulty under which Robert was placed at this time cannot be overestimated. Yet it has been completely ignored in previous examinations of the case. Confronted with his mother's irrational acts, his need and desire to keep her safe, his considerations of manly duty and family privacy, and the admonishments of 6 medical experts, Robert now had to make the decision to act. Convinced he had no other option, he ordered Sweat to act. On May 18th, Sweat personally visited all his trial witnesses, after which he found their case much stronger than he had first suspected. On May 19, Robert filed an affidavit in Cook County Court, after which an arrest warrant was issued on application by Dr. Isham to make Mary Lincoln appear in court to answer the charge of insanity. Sweat appeared at Mary Lincoln's hotel room at 1 p.m. to inform her of the warrant and the proceeding, which was scheduled to begin at 2 p.m., and to convey her to court. I need some water. See if I can find my water. No, I think I drank my water. No, I think I drank my water. The legal system under which Mary Lincoln was tried in May 1875 has received scant attention, which is surprising considering the number of historians who claim she was the victim of a kangaroo court full of brazen injustice, a high handed denial of her civil rights, a gross miscarriage of justice, a conspiracy, a frame up on the part of some of the sharpest legal minds in the country. The circumstances of Mary's trial cannot be judged from a 21st century viewpoint, but must be understood within the context of its contemporary time frame. In 1875, America laws governing the treatment and commitment of insane people varied from state to state. The laws of Illinois guaranteed Mary Lincoln some of the most liberal personal protections in the country at that time, namely a jury trial, even if Robert and the former friends and colleagues of Abraham Lincoln had wanted to go on a male chauvinist rampage to railroad the perfectly sane widow into the asylum. The simple fact is they could not have done so. The state of Illinois began legislating for the care of insane people in 1823 with the act regulating the estates of idiots, lunatics, and persons distracted. This law gave any person accused of insanity the right to a jury trial. If the jury found the defendant insane, the law provided for the judge to appoint a conservator to control and safeguard his or her property. There were no state hospitals for the mentally ill in Illinois at this time, and the insane were kept at home in prisons, in poorhouses, or at private asylums. The great crusade to improve the care and treatment of the mentally ill began in 1841 by Dorothea Dix, prompted the Illinois state legislature to create state mental hospitals and also to amend the 1823 statute. In 1851, a new law declared that married women and minor children could be placed in the state hospitals on the request of the husband of the woman or parent or guardian of the infant without the evidences of insanity or distraction required in other cases. Those other cases, such as those involving the insanity of men, required an application to county court and a trial by jury. The catalyst for changing such a blatantly sexist system occurred in 1860 when a woman named Elizabeth Packard was forcibly removed to the Jacksonville, Illinois State Hospital for the Insane. Her detainment was based solely on the words of her husband, a Calvinist preacher with whose beliefs she publicly disagreed, and his consultation with the hospital superintendent. Her only medical exam was the taking of her pulse. After a 3-year incarceration, Mrs. Packard was released, only to have her husband lock her in the house while he made plans to permanently commit her to an asylum in Massachusetts. Such a house arrest was illegal in Illinois. And in the ensuing trial, at which Reverend Packard claimed his wife was a lunatic, she was declared sane. Packard's husband then took the children and all the family belongings to Massachusetts, leaving his wife behind. Packard subsequently wrote several exposés and memoirs claiming that she was perfectly sane when committed to the asylum, as were many of the other women she encountered there. She used her intelligence and persuasive personality to crusade for a change in Illinois' insanity law. She successfully lobbied the state legislature vociferously, supported by Myra Bradwell in the pages of the popular Chicago Legal News, to require a jury trial for any person subjected to commitment proceedings. This 1867 personal liberty law was still in effect in 1875, thus giving Mary Lincoln a mandatory right to a jury trial. Mental health experts generally did not support the new personal liberty law. The editor of the American Journal of Insanity decried Mrs. Packard as a talkative and crazy woman whose lobbying was a pestilent commotion stimulated by an offense against female vanity. The new law, he claimed, was impractical because it made commitment more difficult. There ought to be no more difficulty in getting a patient into a hospital for the insane than into a hospital for any other disease or accident. The belief that sane people were easily and commonly committed to and trapped in asylums was ridiculous, and even if it were true, the writ of habeas corpus was available in cases of unlawful confinement, he stated. Most important, a public trial made a spectacle of the insane, causing them unnecessary excitement. This was, in fact, the most common complaint of the medical experts. A public trial seriously hindered the insane from receiving help. The horror felt by insane people and their relatives at the general character of legal proceedings under the present law has led to the establishment of private institutions just outside the border of the state of which many avail themselves of those who are able to afford it. One critic wrote, those who could not afford it and whose relatives feared a public trial often received no treatment. Another complaint was that the jury statute failed to recognize the distinction between a trial and an inquest. The adjudication of insanity followed the line of criminal procedure. The unfortunate patient was accused of insanity and, if convicted, taken into custody by the sheriff, exactly as in criminal procedure. Stated Richard Dewey, superintendent of the Kankakee, Illinois State Hospital. The effect was often detrimental, with the patient believing that the court proceedings were for the purpose of substantiating some charge against him, and when found insane, believed himself innocently condemned. Dewey also claimed that more sane people were declared insane by juries than ever had occurred under the previous system. Many physicians agreed with this position, this fear of juror ignorance. The Illinois State Medical Society's Committee on Medical Jurisprudence suggested in an 1873 report that a commission of experts rather than laymen should judge whether a person was insane. In fact, the uncertainty of convincing a jury of laymen was one of the main concerns of Robert's attorneys. Robert was so careful to keep within the truth that the physicians doubted whether we would be able to make out a case sufficiently strong to satisfy the general public, and perhaps not strong enough to secure a verdict. Sweat wrote, the jury consisted of many of Chicago's most successful, capable, and respected men. Charles B. Farwell, member of the U.S. House of Representatives, Lyman J. What the hell am I seeing? Lyman J. Gage, cashier of the Merchants Loan and Trust Company, and later Treasury Secretary under President William McKinley. S.C. Blake, physician and former Chicago City physician and member of the Lincoln and Hamlin Club of Chicago. Businessman J. McGregor Adams of Crerar Adams and Company, a railway supply firm insurance agent, Jesus Christ, the railway supply firm insurance agent S.M. Moore of S.M. Moore and Company, grocer Henry C. Durand of Durand and Company, wholesale boot and shoe dealer C.M. Henderson of C.M. Henderson and Company. Isn't that kind of redundant? Jeweler Thomas Cogswell of Cogswell, Weber and Company, crockery and glassware merchant S.B. Parkhurst of Parkhurst and Company, jobbing stationer and blank book manufacturer D.R. Cameron of Cameron, Amberg, Hoffman and Company, foundryman James A. Mason and wholesale grocer William Stewart of Stewart, Aldrich and Company. These men were truly Mary's economic and social peers. In fact, Judge Marion R.M. Wallace seems to have gone out of his way to find an unimpeachable jury for the widow of the martyred president, a sensible decision since he undoubtedly was aware of the press scrutiny the case would garner. There is no evidence in the known historical record that Robert or his attorneys or advisers were friends with the judge or jury, communicated with the judge or jury, or sought to influence the decisions of the judge or jury. Leonard Swett later wrote that his mission to bring Mary Lincoln to court on the afternoon of May 19th, 1875, presented more real terrors than anything I have ever undertaken. To have advanced on a battery instead would, it seems to me, have been a real relief. It took Swett 1 hour to coax Mary into his carriage and convey her to court, during which time she attacked Swett with bitterness and sarcasm that wounded him worse than bullets would have. Her bitter invective also extended to Robert once she discovered the trial was his doing. Mary at times threw up her hands with tears streaming down her cheeks and prayed to the Lord to release her and drive Swett away. At one point, she asked Swett to leave her room while she changed her dress, but he refused, saying he was afraid if he left her alone, she would leap out the window. Finally, after being threatened with the indignity of sheriff's deputies leading her to court in handcuffs, Mary acquiesced to ride with the attorney to the courthouse. The celerity with which Mary's trial was orchestrated gave few spectators the chance to be present, although, of course, reporters for the major Chicago newspapers were there. Mary sat at the defendant's table with Robert and her attorney, Isaac Arnold, who was not only a friend of her husband, but one of the first biographers of the martyred president, as well as a former congressman. Robert had asked Mary's cousins, John Todd Stewart and Elizabeth Grimsley Brown, to come to Chicago and sit with his mother for moral support during the trial, but neither was able to be present. Before the proceedings began, Arnold approached Swett and said he doubted the propriety of defending her, since he too considered her insane. Swett, who by this time was all used up after his ordeal with Mary, snapped back, "That means that you will put into her head that she can get some mischievous lawyer to make us trouble. Go and defend her and do your duty." A fatigued Swett then told Robert's attorney, B.F. Ayer, to take charge of the case, immediately after which the trial began. Swett's snippy retort to Arnold's conscience has been cited as proof of a male chauvinist conspiracy to railroad Mary Lincoln into the asylum, that Mary Lincoln was robbed of any defense by her sex and by her duplicitous legal counsel. Yet, taken within the context of duty, as Swett even admonished Arnold, the statement takes on a deeper meaning. It was Robert's manly duty to protect his mother, and the duty of Robert's advisers to the memory of their beloved friend Abraham Lincoln to help Robert do his duty. It is obvious that Swett did not want Mary's defense to put up a strong fight, but only because they believed they were acting in Mary's best interests, and a protocol legal fight which would create an unwanted media frenzy. would only prolong her exposure to danger and her lack of appropriate care. The trial of Mary Lincoln lasted 3 hours, during which time 18 witnesses testified to her derangement. As stated above, these included physicians, hotel employees, Chicago merchants, and Mary's only son, a grief stricken Robert looking pale and weepy eyed, reportedly broke down crying twice while on the stand. His face indicated the unpleasantness of the duty he was about to perform, and his eyes were expressive of the grief he felt. One newspaper reported, in addition to his testimony stated above, Robert said he had no idea why his mother thought he was sick in March, as he had not been sick in 10 years. She had always been exceedingly kind to him, but he had no doubt that she was insane. She has been of unsound mind since the death of father, has been irresponsible for the past 10 years. He regarded her as eccentric and unmanageable, in the habit of meeting with strange people, spending lavishly on useless items, and ignoring his advice. She has long been a source of much anxiety to me. The newspaper coverage of Mary's defense is far from conclusive, but Arnold's defense reads as rather perfunctory. The Inter-Ocean showed only 3 cross-examinations by him, the Times showed only 1, and the Tribune mentioned only that he recalled Robert to the stand to ask whether insanity was hereditary in the family. But would a more forceful defense have mattered? 18 witnesses, including 7 medical experts and her own son, built the case against Mary. Sweat later stated that the evidence of Mary's insanity was so overwhelming that they did not even put in their whole case. In fact, the testimony covered only a small portion of Mary's acts and the evidence of her unbalance. Robert allowed only the barest minimum of evidence necessary to establish the case to be introduced at court in order to minimize public exposure and embarrassment. From a historical perspective, it leaves one wondering just how much he kept private and how much documentary evidence he later destroyed, as he admittedly did. One thing not said during the trial but stated in correspondence with his aunt was that Mary once suggested to a lady the idea of kidnapping Robert's 5-year-old daughter. Months after the trial, Mary plotted her son's murder. It is interesting that, despite Robert's belief that part of his mother's problem was her belief in spiritualism, the issue never was specifically declared during the trial. Dr. Danforth's testimony that Mary heard voices, listened to table rappings, and was protected by her husband's spirit certainly smacked of spiritualism. And some newspapers reported that Mary's insanity was partly caused by her belief in spiritualism, but may have been a legal decision considering that the legal connection, if there was one, between spiritualism and insanity was too nebulous. The Maine Supreme Court had only months prior to this trial refused to decide whether a belief in spiritualism was an insane delusion or not. While the Connecticut Supreme Court hesitated on the subject as late as 1882. Contemporary mental health experts were divided on the relationship between spiritualism and insanity. Mary Lincoln did not testify in her own defense. In fact, she never uttered a single word during the entire trial. Sweat concluded his case by simply stating that all Mary's family and friends considered her insane ever since the assassination of her husband, and that the weight of so much tragedy in her life had been too much for her to bear. Robert applied to the court only after consultation with his father's friends and numerous medical experts. and everyone involved or interested had approved of his action. After that, the jury adjourned. During the hiatus, when Robert approached his mother trying to comfort her, she exclaimed, "Oh, Robert, oh, Robert, to think that my son would ever have done this." This exchange was published widely in contemporary newspapers, has been quoted often in subsequent histories of the case, and has done much to create and perpetuate Robert's reputation as a cold man. Within 10 minutes of its adjournment, the jury returned a verdict of insanity. Robert was appointed conservator of Mary's estate 46 years after the trial. Junior Lyman Gage told historian William E. Barton that while Mary Lincoln did not appear violently insane to the jury, it was clear that she suffered from phobia and occasional insane delusions, such as her fear of fire and her manic purchasing. There seemed no other course than for the jury to find the lady guilty as charged, Gage wrote. He also stated that after the trial, the leading physician who testified against Mary, probably Willis Danforth, judging from time on the stand, privately told him there was no doubt whatever of the fact of her mental aberration, that it was a case of dementia or degeneration of the brain tissue, and that within 2 years she would die from it. There can be little doubt that Danforth, or whoever Gage's physician was giving the same diagnosis to Robert Lincoln, which adds yet another layer of understanding to his motivations for the trial. It is important at this point to take a step back and consider Robert Lincoln on the most horrible day. When it comes to Robert's emotions concerning the trial, his detractors consider him cold as flint and devoid of sentiment, yet the newspaper coverage described his appearance and testimony as grief stricken and weepy eyed. The Inter-Ocean described him on entry into the courtroom as pale, and that his eyes bore evidence of weeping. It reported that he broke down in tears twice during his personal testimony, and that after his mother's final accusation, he turned away to conceal his grief. The Tribune likewise reported that his eyes were suffused with tears. Upon his entry into court, it also stated that his eyes were expressive of the grief he felt when he took the stand to testify, and that after his mother's final words to him, his response was stifled by the illegible of tears. As for Robert's motives, none of the major Chicago newspapers observed or accused him of insincerity or cruelty. The Times stated he discharged his delicate and unhappy task with filial thoughtfulness. The Inter-Ocean's more complex coverage reported the opening statements of Robert's attorney, B.F. Ayer, who said the proceedings were instituted by Robert through feelings of concern for his mother's safety. Ayer stated that Mary Lincoln's friends and family feared some harm might befall her unless she is placed under restraint. They do not intend that she shall be sent to a state asylum, but to a private asylum where she will be cared for properly. This latter statement is especially intriguing and noteworthy as refutation of the conspiracy theorists, because the Illinois insanity statute assumed placement in the state hospital for the insane, although it allowed the family of non-paupers to place them in another facility. Surely, if Robert was as heartless as he has been accused, he would have left Mary to the state rather than invest time and money in finding a private sanitarium for her. The Tribune likewise reported that the proceedings were instituted to protect her from her own hands and to secure her from bodily harm. It reported Robert as testifying that he had instituted the trial in the interest of his mother. He did not want any money from her. The Inner Ocean also reported he did not want any money from her. The papers show Robert's statement was made at his own instigation, not in response to a question. So why did he make that statement? It has come to be regarded as a beacon of subterfuge and insincerity, evidence that he really did want her money. Yet, given Robert's keen experience with sensationalist newspapers and the fact that they could make even noble deeds sound avaricious, he knew a petition to take charge of her estate and confine her would be regarded as rapacious. Therefore, his statement was preemptive. If it had seemed insincere or the trial appeared duplicitous, surely the eager and often sensationalist press would have reported it so. Robert, in fact, spent more than $1,000 to commit and care for his mother at Dr. R.J. Patterson's privately run Bellevue Place Sanitarium in Batavia, Illinois, from May through October 1875. Perhaps this is a nominal amount compared to the $84,035 he eventually inherited at Mary's death in 1882. But Robert actually fully expected his mother to cut him out of her will. In fact, he even recommended it. To Mary's mind, however, her last surviving son and the men her husband trusted above all others had robbed and betrayed her. After losing her parents, her friends and family, her children and husband, her social position and public respect, Mary Lincoln had now lost her freedom, and more important to her monomaniacal mind, her money. This final loss, permeated by indignity, was so acutely painful, so horribly overwhelming, that the next morning, after evading the guards outside her hotel room, Mary Lincoln tried to kill herself. And that was another not so great reading, but like I said, I'm tired, so oh well. That's all for chapter 4, bruv. Until next time. Goodbye, bruv. Goodbye. Goodbye.